Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Book Goodies, the podcast by authors for authors. I'm one of your hosts, Deborah Carney, and I'm joined today by
Karen Garcia. How you doing, Deborah?
Good. And today we are joined by author Paul Reinig. Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Hello, Deborah, and hello, Karen.
Hello.
We're both folks that love reading and writing, and Karen's working on her first novel, so we're giving her tips and advice along the way and encouraging her, even on days when she has a migraine.
Yeah. It never fails.
Never fails. No writing today. So, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and let them know a little bit about you?
Okay, well, basically, I actually have 3 books. I think the topic of this podcast is going to be my memoir. Is that correct?
It can be any of the 3 books you want, and
all right,
including them all. So,
awesome. Well, yeah. Gosh, everybody has a story, right?
Mm-hmm. Just give us a little bit of your background so we know where you're coming from.
Okay, well, I had a lot of self-esteem issues going through life, and by the time I got out of high school, I was so lost is the word that I like to use, that I really didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. And this was early 70s, and along came the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, who was offering an opportunity to save the world. Mm-hmm. And it appeared to be right up my alley at the time. What it really did was provided an umbrella of safety and, security, but it certainly wasn't, an easy course. I actually worked my rear end off for several years because he was really into total investment of yourself into saving what he called the higher purpose. In other words, he wants you to live for the world. There's not time for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's the energy that I allowed myself to get caught up into, or as I use the word swallowed up into in my memoir. Mm-hmm. And I spent 23 years with that movement. So that in and of itself is a story, which is really why I wrote the memoir. All the way along, throughout that entire experience, I was keeping journals. And in 2001, I realized that I had about 45 plus journals.
Nice.
So it was amazing. I just started going through them. Took a long time to distill it down to what I felt was really choice stuff that I had found about myself. It was very therapeutic as well. So in 2007, I put out a grand and glorious adventure, The Saboteur Years, which is my memoir. It was really me looking at myself and seeing certain patterns in my writing of the way that I perceived life, the need to suffer, the need to, Moon called it pay indemnity. The Catholics would call that penance. Mm-hmm. But Moon's perspective on it was much more than just saying a few Hail Marys. It was total sacrifice of your life. Sacrificing food, sleep, and sex, that's as he put it, in order to save mankind. And he believed he was the second coming of Christ. I bought into it. So he was literally my savior.
And at what point did you finally decide that this wasn't actually working out the way you expected it to?
It started subtly in around 89. I joined in 75. It started around 89 when I began, little things started creeping into the mind. But I couldn't allow my mind to entertain those thoughts. I just simply could not do it because, like the Catholic Church that I grew up in, if you think thoughts contrary to your own belief system, you're putting your spiritual life in jeopardy, or your soul, or however they called it. Mm-hmm. So the threat of going to hell was a big one, and it took a while. But what really turned the corner was he created this theological seminary, which it took him quite a few years to finally get the state of New York to accredit it. Mm-hmm. But when he finally did, I decided to attend it. So in 91, I went through and got a graduate degree in religious education. And the amazing thing about that experience is that because we were studying Christianity in depth, as we compared it to Moon's theology, which was quite extensive and systematic, I started realizing that all of these different religions have more or less been making it up as they go along. And,
very good observation. So, a lot of them, yeah.
I mean, it's based on the inspiration of whoever's receiving, they're getting their particular inspiration from so-called God, or whatever they call it. But it's in the moment when they're open to it, and that whoever is supposed to hear it in their, community, that's the inspiration that's flowing. It's not necessarily for anybody else, but it eventually is taken like that. So that started some deeper seeds, and then there was a lot of things going on in Moon's family. His oldest son was getting arrested for drunk driving occasionally. Long about 96 or 7, his oldest son, who was supposed to be the heir of the throne, his wife smuggled their 4 kids out of the mansion and wrote a book called In the Shadow of the Moons. And she went on Good Morning America and a number of other talk shows talking about how he would beat her and this, that, and the other. So it wasn't pretty. It really, it was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And in 98, I just basically made a firm decision, you know what, I'm just no longer going to be a part of this movement. However, I have to say that that's when a lot of incredible trepidation began, because that threat of hell was still hanging around.
Right.
And it took really about 5 or 6 years before I felt comfortable with the decision and that I could look upon Moon and the teachings and anybody in it and not feel threatened in the least.
That's interesting that it took you so long to... Do you look at it as deprogramming or just assimilating out into the world again?
Well, and you have to understand, too, I was really heavily into self-loathing there all of those years,
right,
as well as my growing up years. So what we're talking about here is really a willingness to begin releasing the need to beat myself up, which wasn't an easy thing to let go of. Well beyond Moon, I realized that this is very ingrained stuff. I believe it's related to a lot of past life stuff, personally. That's neither here nor there ultimately, but I feel that I'm carrying a lot of things that, I had to work on and get through. And that's ultimately what led me to write my second and third book.
Well, and I like that you journaled the whole way through, even though you were constantly under the threat of being discovered. Did the things in your journal, like, did you ask the questions that you were starting to feel? Did you write that down in your journal, or did you kind of mask it? I had one woman who journals that wrote her journal in Greek so that no one would be able to read it.
It's funny you say that. No, when thoughts like that came up, it was probably, when the entire graduating class from the seminary, which was in 93, he sent us all to Russia. He had managed to get the Minister of Education there to allow him to come in. I'm not sure why. They wouldn't let the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses in, but they let us in. Mm-hmm. So we were able to, I was actually literally teaching large groups of teachers. They had thrown Marxism out, and the minister wanted some kind of substitute. Moon had put together this sort of watered-down version of his principle in bringing in a bit of Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and Christianity into it. But ultimately, of course, he was basically just wanting to get his foot in the door there. Mm-hmm. So I was teaching this watered-down stuff to these teachers through a translator. It was kind of a fun experience. I loved talking. But nevertheless, I was in Russia, and it's not where I wanted to be. And as far as I knew, I was going to be there for life. I mean, he was basically just sending us to go there. So I'd always had this interest in broadcasting. And when I was a kid, it was big interest, which I kind of, again, my self-esteem issues would never have allowed me at 18 years old to pursue it. But in 93, I had a whole other desire. And so I literally sort of went AWOL and went back to my hometown and decided to get a degree in broadcast journalism.
Yeah.
And understand at this point I'm married. Moon also matched us with people.
Okay.
Everyone that was in the church got matched by him, and then he would have these big mass weddings. The mass wedding I was in was held in Madison Square Garden in 1982. There was 2,075 couples. So from
I
82
remember that.
yeah, well, that's a whole story in itself. That's the memoir is a fantastic read if you want to understand what the goings on with inside of someone who's in one of these religious cults.
Okay.
But not only that, but it's also what I had to go through in order to begin trying to relate to this woman that I didn't know and really didn't care for.
Here, this is your wife. This is your wife for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi, and by the way, I can't stand the way you look.
Stranger then?
Yes.
Wow. When was the first time that you met your future bride? Was it actually at the wedding?
No, it was at the matching. It was in 1979.
Okay. Wow.
It was actually, he bought this hotel in New York called the New Yorker Hotel. It was actually only about a block and a half away from Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, I know exactly where it is.
But it just happened that was the case. I mean, he was doing matchings all over the world. And later he had big weddings. After the Olympics in Seoul, he actually had a huge wedding there that was bigger than the one I was in.
My goodness.
But it was what was called a 3.5-year separation, which was required, and it just happened that between the matching and the wedding, it was nearly 3.5 years. So in our case, it was kind of good in that way that once the wedding occurred, we didn't have long before we could actually get together. But when we get together, it was like opening Pandora's box. All kinds of things that I didn't realize I had going on inside of me all came out.
Right.
And I basically had to go into psychotherapy for a while.
Wow.
It was pretty intense. I was going through this anger management, pounding pillow type stuff. But, it wasn't sanctioned by the church that much. It's kind of, but it was a little bit under the carpet. But it was my personal desire to try to save this marriage, since, of course, I did believe it was given to me by God through the hands of my Savior.
Right. And then how did you support yourself through those years? Did he give everybody an allowance, or did you do things to earn money, or how did that all work? I know you probably explained it all in the book, but I'm just curious so that we give the listeners enough background to want to go and read it.
We were taught very early on to fundraise, and basically we were given, I think my first fundraising experience, if I remember right, I had a box of these homemade candles. Don't remember selling candles a whole lot. Basically, it turned out to be mostly flowers, sometimes boxed candies,
Right. Okay.
all kinds of stuff. Another thing, too, Deborah and Karen and I, in 1977, in a meeting with Moon, let me backtrack just a sec. When I first joined, it just happened that he had started up what he called a 120-day training in New York, and it was in upstate New York, and I was joining in Iowa, and he prefaced that 120-day training with a 40-day training, and he was looking for new converts to come from wherever they were converted from to attend and go through this 40 and then 120-day training. So as it turned out, I got selected to do that. Once that was over, I was sent to Las Vegas for a while as a quote pioneer missionary, but there was actually some others that I could work together with there.
Okay.
But then in 1977, I believe this was in June, he called all his pioneer missionaries to New York, and he handpicked me to be what he called a state leader.
Okay.
So I was sent at that time to New Orleans to be the state leader of Louisiana. And from that point on, for the next 8 years, I was able to be with him once a month on a regular basis as one of his 50 state leaders.
Nice. Or not nice,
So
depending.
Well, the whole entire time, I never received any funding from them. So, of course, half the month or more that I was in my state, I was fundraising not only to pay our bills, but to get back to New York in order to see him. So it was quite a bit of fundraising. The witnessing only was sparse and sporadic, and I was never really that successful at that. getting other members to come in, which is what the state leader was supposed to do.
Right.
So it was all amazing when I look back on it. I can laugh at it, but.
Well, and, like you said, he preyed on people that had poor self-esteem or that were floundering and, I don't even know. I know he was so big in the 70s and 80s. Is he even around anymore now, or?
He is. He's still alive. That's all I know. He would be 92 now. I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention since really 98.
Right.
I have to say, though, I think he really did believe he was the second coming of Christ. I mean, he was very charismatic, and whenever we were in those leaders' meetings, he always gave us tremendous amounts of love and attention. And you could say that he was preying on us, but and in one sense you could look at it that way, but never at any time to this day do I consider myself a victim.
Okay.
It was my choice all the way through, and I allowed him to dictate to me my lifestyle, and I agreed to it until I didn't. Right.
And to me, it's kind of like the military. Like, you'll do whatever they say until suddenly you're done. You just have had enough.
Well, funny you should say that, because we used to call ourselves the Heavenly Army.
Right, and that's exactly what you pretty much were. Anybody with a military background will tell you that. You get what they give you, and you go out and do what they tell you to do, and you don't question it. And, they put you through educational courses or whatever so that you can learn to be better, and you get promoted through the ranks. And in your case, you didn't get compensated for being promoted through the ranks, but basically you were in a military type situation where, again, you were afraid to leave for fear of punishment and for fear of, going to hell, which is a very real fear for, anybody that believes in that type of a religion where, you either go to a good place or you go to a bad place after you die. So.
Indeed. I also became quite proficient in the teaching of his principle because I really loved it, and I love to teach. And so that was really my highest times were when I was able to teach it.
And then what led you to decide to write the book?
Well, again, I got out in '98, and then at that point, my ex and I, she just decided, we become what I consider to be friends and like a brother and sister. Mm-hmm. We could laugh together at times, but it wasn't. It was never romantic. She wanted a romantic relationship. I mean, she really wanted, and so did I. Mm-hmm. So when we both decided that it really wasn't working for us, we just sort of gave each other the blessing. We literally filed for divorce together. Mm-hmm. Went down and went through the procedures. And then she went off to be with her sister for a while, and I've never talked to her since. I don't have a clue about what's going on with her.
Right. Well, you started as strangers and you ended as friendly strangers.
Pretty much. I mean, we did get to know each other pretty well, all of our, insides and outs and faults and good qualities. But when you want to be able to give your life to share your life with someone on a romantic level, and it wasn't happening, then, you move on.
And did you do that before? Or did she leave the church? Did she leave the movement when you left? Or
yeah,
okay.
We were both taking a look at what was going on within his family, and she, I believe, if I'm remembering right, she got involved in an Artist Way group, and there was a lot of women that she was going to see in that group, and that they had a big influence on her too. So she's coming home saying she wants a divorce. And I'm like, we were actually fairly codependent at that time, so it wasn't that easy.
Right.
We were codependent because Moon was really pushing strongly for the couples to have kids, and
right.
we weren't able to have them for whatever reason. We even had couples once they had 4, 5, 6 kids where they were coming to us and offering us kids.
Oh my God!
Then when they would try to get pregnant, or they would get pregnant, they'd have miscarriages, and after that happened twice. My wife's like, this is totally ridiculous. I can't take this any longer.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah, so to answer your question about why I decided to write the book, I knew in '01, I'd kind of been thinking about it, but in '01, I'm like looking at that box of my journals, and I'm going, you know what? there's got to be an amazing story there if I just am willing to go through those pages. And it just took a long time.
And
did you continue to journal after you left the movement?
I have, yeah. To this day, I've probably got upwards towards 70 now.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a lot of journals.
I don't do it as daily like I used to, but I think these days it's about once a week.
Mm-hmm. Is it kind of I've when you're kids and especially girls, you tend to have a diary squirreled away somewhere, at least for a few months to a year or whatever. And looking back at that now, my writings from when I was in high school or whatever, it's almost as if it's a completely different person. Do you kind of feel that way about your own journals?
Oh, absolutely. That was another lifetime as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I bring out in my memoir, which is probably the reason that I subtitled it "The Saboteur Years," was because I saw a pattern in the way that I perceive things in 3 separate decades. In other words, there was the self-loathing came out in my writing, but within the course of a decade, it just shifted in the way I was writing it, and I sort of put a different angle on it, and then like about 7, 8, 9 years later, here I see a whole different approach to it, and yet it's the same self-loathing. And so I'm really almost kind of doing a comparative in the book as well on the me in the 70s, the me in the 80s, the me in the 90s.
Oh, interesting.
It was a lot of fun to write. But I do want to, before we run out of time, at least mention briefly the other 2 books, because the newest book is actually I just published in March, and it's called The True Love Handbook: How to End Suffering, Become Your Own Best Friend, and Begin Living Your Dreams. And this book is really the culmination of everything that I've learned up until now. I guess you could say it's basically my wisdom, for what it's worth.
Well, and I think it's really important to get books like that from people like you that have gone through a unique experience. As much as the movement had a lot of people involved, there was also still all those of us looking in going, why would people do this? Why are they doing this to themselves? Why are they joining this? And, we all saw it as a cult, not a religious movement. We saw it as a religious cult.
Yes.
And, again, we're a society of voyeurs. We want to know why other people do what they do and how they got through it. And then, like I asked, how did you finally come out of it? And then it's wonderful that you had all those journals that you could go back and recreate and now talk about that, because in addition, I look at memoirs as being a piece of history. You're telling a piece of history that other people can relate to in the future, totally separate circumstances, but other people would be able to relate to it in the future because they went through the same emotional types of things that you went through. And I think that you capture a slice of life that people wouldn't know about otherwise.
Well, and it's a personal thing too as well, because I was born in the late 70s, so I completely have no recollection of this in the news or anything like that. But I do remember it being taught in my history class for like a day, where we went over, various things, the Hare Krishna movement and things like that. And it all kind of lumped together, and it was just a single passing, fleeting thing. And to actually have something that you could go back to as a, here is what actually happened to me, that's much more poignant and much more powerful than, a 2-sentence byline in a history book. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to write things like this, because there is a certain amount of credibility that comes from somebody who was there. And to write about it, 100 years after the fact, as so many of our history books from things about the 1700s or whatever are, it's very disconcerting. It's so much better when it's a personal account.
I completely agree. And in those days, nowadays, I also have had that experience where anyone, especially born even beyond the 70s, 80s or 90s. Any concept that they have of religious cults, they just don't have any idea at all, which is okay. It's fine. But I'm a firm believer that the future is the past healed. And so to take time to go through, to write, one of the things I realized is, which my True Love Handbook is all about, is that we all have what I call emotional aspects. Emotions get triggered when we're growing up. We're not in a position to handle them because we don't really, you don't particularly know what to do if you get hurt for whatever reason, whether physically or in any other way. And so we tend to push those emotions away. But they don't really go away. They become like I call them emotional aspects. They are energy kind of tied up into our psyche in some way, and they're attached to us. The nature of energy is that it seeks resolution. Really not that much different than water. If you put your hand in a calm bowl of water and stir it all up, then it's going to swish around, but eventually it's going to go back to level. And that's because the nature of energy is that it seeks a level or a balance. Or in terms of emotional aspects, it seeks resolution, which in my opinion is why we get triggered at all. And in fact, why things come into our life to trigger us. It really has little to anything to do with what it is triggering us, except that energy is working for us to find resolution, and so it will come around to allow those emotions to come up so that we can find a way into resolution. If you don't understand that, and especially if you think you're a victim and that other thing is the reason that you're feeling the way you are, then there's not going to be any resolution at all. You're just going to push it away. You're probably going to magnify it. I used to do that all the time. But now I realize, oh no, actually, I'm responsible for all of these emotions. I don't care if it was a past life or this life, I'm responsible. Therefore, I learned to start finding compassion for the me that was hurting. And in whatever the hurting is, whether it's pain, emotional pain, loneliness, depression, sadness, whatever. And I had mega emotional issues, especially when I got out of the Moonies. So I would wrap my arms around myself in a big hug. Sometimes I'd be in the fetal position crying my head out. But I'd somewhere inside find compassion for the me that's going through this, and I'd start telling myself, it's going to be okay, I love you, it's going to be okay. Eventually I created what I called 4 phrases that got me completely through it. Basically very simple. The first phrase was simply saying yes, or accepting whatever it is. If you're resisting energy or emotions or anything, anytime there's resistance in your life, it's only going to magnify it. But if you're let's say you're embracing somebody, it's going to be hard to fight him while you're embracing them. And likewise, and likewise, if you're embracing your emotions, you're not resisting them and pushing them away. It allows them to come into balance in their own organic way. You can't force it, you can't control it, but you allow it. And that's what allowance or acceptance, the first phrase. Second phrase was thank you. Thank you, or having appreciation and gratitude for the fact that this is allowing me to bring these emotions home, to integrate them and to bring them into balance. Because once that energy gets freed up, where what was before bottled up in that energy, that emotion, now you have that energy available for other uses. And it could be to create things that you may have never been able to create before. That's certainly been the case for me. I couldn't create anything because I was so emotionally bottled up. Third phrase is I love you, which is basically expressing compassion. The compassion for the me that's hurting, and as I said. And then the fourth phrase is I am that I am, and I realize it's because I finally realized that I'm actually a divine being having a human experience. And so the one who's having compassion for the hurting me is the real me having compassion for a part of me that in fact is just an illusion. That I accepted as real when I couldn't deal with those emotions and push them away, but it was just an illusion that I was hurting. I just allowed myself to buy into and identify with them. So basically, I am that I am is shifting your identification away from the illusion and onto what's real. And it's those 4 phrases that I speak at length in the True Love Handbook. I give a lot of personal experiences long after the Moonies. I don't really speak about the Moonies much at all in that book because it's all in my memoir. So it's mostly about my coming into my own after leaving that movement. And so it's experiences. There's 4 sections, and one section is these tools that I just spoke of. Another section is my personal experiences. The first section is actually somewhat of an esoteric, my understanding of the evolution of consciousness and what humanity's been going through. And what we're facing today with the potential to literally make a whole new world if we choose. And the 4th section is just advanced stuff that came to me as I got more and more integrated. So it's 300 pages. It's a very in-depth study into aspects and how to resolve them. And that's my personal testimony with it. So it's not so much blackboard theory, which it used to be as a Moonie,
right?
But it's my personal experience of literally integrating emotions and becoming so much more whole, balanced, and feeling comfortable with me. Whereas at one time I was absolutely in trepidation being with me, which is also why people go outside themselves looking for someone to support them or whatever, relationships or anything. Moon in my case.
It's wild.
That's very
Excuse me.
Oh, goodness.
Sorry about that.
Land shark. Occasionally we get the random interruption.
Thank you.
So you've told us about your memoir, so A Grand and Glorious Adventure, and then the True Love Handbook. What's your 3rd book?
Okay, actually the second book I published in 2010 because the True Love Handbook is the most recent one.
Oh, okay.
The second book actually is called Apostle Paul, The Untold Story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this was a personal desire and need of mine that I had to put that out. And it was something that kind of began when I went through seminary because we were studying religion in depth. And I started realizing that Christianity is basically what, in fact, the professors there, who, by the way, were non-Moonies, we had a Methodist, a Catholic, and actually, we had a Sikh there. We had different, and the perceptions that they had of Christianity was that they call it Pauline Christianity. This is a very common phrase in the world of theologians, because Christianity basically follows the words of Paul. If you study Jesus, they don't really follow him so well, and the reason they don't is because it's kind of hard to live by these words that he's saying. Take the log out of your own eye before, accusing. Well, people, most people consider themselves just basic sinners, and so they'd rather just accept that they have a Savior and be good with that. I'm good, I got my Savior. And that whole concept of salvation, and particularly the saved by the blood, that is totally Paul. There's nothing in Jesus' words that have anything to do with that.
Right.
So I had to write a book about it because I realized that Western civilization is basically following words that were totally based on an illusion.
Wow, you guys had an interesting conversation while I stepped away.
You stepped away. So to catch you up, we're talking about his 3rd book, which is actually the 2nd book, which is what was it again? Apostle Paul, the End Story.
Yes.
Awesome.
And I had some of my own personal revelations that came through me as well. My journaling got pretty intense during that time. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I absolutely knew I needed to get up and write. I'd get up, get my pen, and I'm telling you that stuff could not come out fast enough.
Okay.
It just really went beyond the mind. And most of that time, this was like 08, 09, most of that stuff was all about the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
So I knew that there was something about me and the need to put out Paul, and so finally I just put it out, and that came out in March of 10.
Now, how are you publishing? Are you a self-publisher, or are you published through a publishing house?
I am self-published, yes.
Okay.
The last 2 books I went through Lightning Source.
Okay.
The first one was a company called Page Free Publisher. However, they went out of business. So basically, I have several copies of it still, so people can still get it from me. But I figure, if at some point those copies sell, then I might well just decide to republish it through Lightning Source.
Okay, that makes sense. And are they available in ebook also, or only in hardcover?
No, actually, I have all three are available in ebook. Yes.
Okay, cool.
All of them are there. It's all basically on my masteringtruelove.com website. You can purchase them, all the ebooks there. You can purchase the memoir from me, the Apostle Paul from me. Actually, at the moment I'm out of my newest book, which is a good thing. It's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still available on Amazon in the U.S. and UK, and it's also available in Australia on the Nile.com, which is a big online bookstore over there.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. And also now through Amazon, if you're not familiar with Amazon CreateSpace, they just opened up your books are available now in Europe and many other countries. The same way the Kindle ebooks are now available all around the world. We sell every month to Spain and Germany and Denmark and anywhere that the Amazon has a store or a website. So that's really cool.
Which does remind me that the last two books, the Apostle Paul and the True Love Handbook, they are also available on Kindle too.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Now, you've taken us down a really long road, and that's really cool. And our listeners, I'm sure, got a lot of fascinating tips out of it before you even, without us even asking questions about it. But what would be your advice to a writer that may have a difficult past or that has something in their past like you have, and they're considering writing, but they're not sure if they should?
Well, again, I'm a firm believer that the future is the past healed. So if they've had a past, and particularly a one that was challenging, and they're getting a sense that writing might help, my suggestion is it absolutely will help. And if you don't know where to start, you basically just get a pen and you start. And while I may have had the advantage of having journals, it doesn't really matter, because if someone's willing to just start, or another option is to get a little digital handheld recorder, and you just start recording memories whenever they pop up. Let somebody else transcribe that, or you do it later, but not to worry about what's going to come with it. Just get the information out.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my suggestion. As far as, yes, you can help and get started by simply, when a memory comes, whatever your experience is, or, start talking about it. Either speak about it or write about it, and don't be bashful.
Mm-hmm. Was your intention when you started this process as something more cathartic, or was it something that you actually intended to publish from the get-go?
I definitely intended to publish from the get-go. I just was surprised that it took me 6 years.
Oh, yeah, it does take a while sometimes.
well, it only took me a couple years to get through the journals because I was pretty intensely focused on it. Mm-hmm. But you have to understand, by the time I got through those journals and was writing, I had to take from the journal and type into the computer what it said in the journal. And I was pretty literal, word for word. I wanted to keep it. In fact, in my book, my memoir, I keep the quotes in little, quote boxes. Literally out of my journal, so I didn't edit those, and I had 800 pages of those in 2003.
Wow!
And that's what took me. It took me actually up to about 2006 to get those distilled down into 252, and then I sent it off to a professional copy editor, and it just took a while. And it was finally, it came out in 2007.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a really long process. So you must have been a very prolific journaler.
Yes, and like I said, the amazing thing was to be able to compare what I was going through in these different decades, and that became the fascinating approach in the book about wow, look, I had this and then I did this and then this. But so many of the different experiences I had, there was a lot of amazing experiences I had as a Moonie, is what we were called. There's a lot of that in there too. What it was like meeting people. Sometimes we'd get leaders come visit us, and I'd have to take care of them. And Just this is a lot of different stuff. It's 252 pages. It's quite a bit of information in there in my memoir.
I like it. Karen, do you want to start our wrap up? Karen has come up with some really fun ways to slide from our interview into our closing, and it's actually kind of fun.
So this is kind of a little bit off the wall, so bear with us here. But if you could live anywhere on the planet, where would you go?
In this now moment?
Yes.
Florida.
Yeah?
That's where I live, actually.
Oh, well, then that's perfect. You're already there.
Yeah, I've been there since January of 2007, and I lived all over the country as a Moonie, 10 different states, traveled to different countries, and while there are a lot of beautiful places, and I, of course, still want to explore some places, so who knows, I may move elsewhere later. But the thing I love about Florida is you've got water there, and I just love the energy there. So
that's fantastic. It's always home is where the heart is, but at the same point in time, there are so many people that I know that home is just home, and so the fact that that you would choose Florida over everywhere, and that happens to be where you are, that's actually kind of interesting, because occasionally you hear all the I'd go live in Paris or whatever, but that's awesome that you've found your place and you like it. That's actually really cool.
you didn't ask me if I had two places to live, because
do you have two places then?
My ideal would be to have homes in two places, and the other one would be somewhere in the mountains.
Ah, nice.
Potentially, maybe northern New Mexico or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where I want to go. I want to live in the Southwest again. I lived there for a short time, and I love New York City where I'm living now, but I totally, my energy is in, I have two places where I feel a lot of energy, and one is Manhattan, and the other is in the Southwest. I feel totally at peace with myself in the Southwest.
I completely understand. I lived there for 5-6 years after getting out of the Moonies as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I haven't made it to there yet. So I've done the Pacific Northwest, and I've done the Midwest, and I've done the New York area, and I've been to Florida a couple of times, but I have yet to actually hit the South and the Southwest.
I need to take her to Sedona.
There you go.
Well, I've always wanted to go to Antelope Canyon.
Yes, we'll go to Sedona.
I see the pictures and they're gorgeous, and I just want to see it for myself, because I know that the pictures probably don't do it justice.
No, it's an absolutely beautiful place that I went earlier this year, Antelope Canyon. It was fabulous.
Fantastic.
And it's a half a mile walk that produced. I took over 1,000 photos in that half mile.
Oh my goodness!
Where is that?
It's in northern Arizona, just like at the edge of the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
It's in I think the town's name is Page, and the only way you can get into Antelope Canyon is with a Native American guide. You cannot go by yourself. Not allowed.
I have been to Page. I remember, but I don't recall the Antelope Canyon now.
Okay. Karen, next?
Let's see, what should I ask you next? I think I'll ask you, if you were stranded on a desert island, what book would you take with you?
Oh, goodness. Assuming that I need a book, right?
Well, assuming that you need it, yes.
This may seem partial, but I honestly would take my own True Love Handbook.
Yeah.
And that's because another byproduct of integrating emotional aspects and by having compassion for them is that you literally begin falling in love with yourself. And what's been happening is I've been finding a love for myself that I never knew it could ever exist. And so my most recent creations, which this being one, that book, True Love Handbook, actually, just on a side, I just 2 days ago made available a CD that I'm a musician, play guitar, and at least on a digital download basis. Mm-hmm. I have over 70 minutes of instrumental recordings that's available through something called CD Baby, and I just absolutely love listening to my own music.
That's great. And I think that you could use your own True Love Handbook to just go back and remind yourself on days where you're, if you're on a deserted island, you might feel like you need to have days to, feel better about yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I can get my little coconut and talk to it, like.
Always wanted to be like the professor and make a radio out of them.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so tell us again where we can find your books.
All right, my website is www.masteringtruelove.com, and there you can find basically you can get all my books from there, except at the moment the True Love Handbook. I am hoping to get more soon, but those are available on Amazon.com in the UK and the US, as well as thenile.com in Australia. And the Apostle Paul book is also available through Amazon and the Nile. The Saboteur the Grand and Glorious Adventure of the Saboteur Years is only available for me personally at this point. But hey, you get it autographed, so.
That's
fantastic.
Pretty cool.
Bonus.
That is pretty cool. Okay, so for those of you that are listening via podcatchers or on a site other than our own site, please come visit BookGoodies.com, BookGoodies.com, and let us know what you think. You can search for Paul, and you can find the show notes for this podcast, and you can leave us comments, or you can go up to the Contact Us form at the top of the page and let us know if you'd rather send us a private note, if you have questions for Paul, or if you have questions for Karen and I, or if you have a suggestion for a topic. And then if you can, if you want to be a guest, there's a form there that you can fill out to be a guest, and there's also a form to tell us about your book. And after you fill it out, we will put the book information up on our website. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Paul and Karen both for being here. And everybody get out there, get writing, and have a great day.
It's a great honor to be on your show. Thank you so much, Deborah and Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
All right, I got to put you guys on hold for a second.